Good evening. I'd like to go ahead and take this time and welcome everyone here to the Services Church of Christ at Gardendale. It's already been done, and extend my invitation to you and welcome to you. Go ahead and thank Andrew for the opportunity to speak. I think it was more of he wanted to study for his test on Tuesday, and so he asked me and really encouraged me. He's like, "Yeah, you'll do a great job." So I think that I hope that we'll get something out of this tonight. In the same vein of thought as Andrew had this morning, he talked about something that had been on his mind lately, and this has really been on my mind. A lot of you probably know that I go to UAB. I'm trying to get my bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and I think that every day I have such an opportunity before me, and I don't know that I always take advantage of the opportunities that I'm given. And that's really where I'm coming from, talking about being strong and courageous in the Lord tonight. I think that, it's hard to recognize the opportunities that we have that are right in front of us to spread God's word and, to be strong enough to take those opportunities. I think that a lot of times, there's never really any spiritual discussion with the people that I go to school with, unless if I were to bring it up. There's a lot of responsibility on us if you're at work or if you're at school or wherever to be strong enough to either, bring up topics that maybe aren't normal for people of your age or maybe just aren't normal in general, and to be able to be strong in that way for the Lord and to spread His word. I have up here Joshua chapter 1 and verse 7, and this is what we read just a few minutes ago. Robert read just a few minutes ago. It says, this is God talking to Joshua, "Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or the left, that you may prosper wherever you go." And the reason why I put this up here is because this is really where I got be strong and courageous in the Lord. This is where I was thinking at first. It's not ultimately the direction I decided to go with this lesson, but I think it's very applicable to us. Joshua, he was in this position where he had a lot of opportunity in front of him. And, God was telling him, if you're strong in the law which I gave to Moses, be strong and very courageous in that, and that will help you be successful in leading the people. So tonight I want to talk about three examples of people in the Scriptures that we can look to as examples for being strong and courageous in the Lord. The first one is Moses. He's in the Old Testament. The second one is Peter. And then the third one is going to be Jesus. And the first two obviously are imperfect examples, right? They're not necessarily the standard by which we should compare ourselves. But I think that if we look at Jesus at the end, obviously he's the perfect example. He's the one that we should compare ourselves to be the standard for being strong in the Lord. And then we're going to talk about some application at the end. So let's jump into it. Be strong and courageous in the Lord like Moses. The first instance I want to look at is in Exodus chapter 3. It's when the Lord has actually called Moses. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 10, it says, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So the Lord calls Moses, and Moses, right after that, he's just like, "Yes, Lord, I'll do that. I'll go ahead and I'll go to Pharaoh, and I'm not scared at all." Right? Well, no, that's not his reaction at all, is it? Moses' reaction is to be scared. I think that I can really resonate with Moses in this situation, because I feel like if I was asked by the Lord to do something of this magnitude, to go to someone as powerful as Pharaoh, I would react in a similar way, right? I think most of us would. I don't know that I'm the best person, Lord. Pick someone else. I don't think that I can handle this responsibility you placed onto me. But after some debate between the Lord and between Moses, and the Lord agreeing to let Aaron be Moses' mouthpiece and those kind of things, we see Moses boldly going to Pharaoh and asking him to let God's people go. In chapter 5 and verse 1, it says, "Afterward Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness.'" So Moses did it. Moses was strong and courageous. He followed the Lord's commands. He was obedient. The second thing I want to look at in Moses' life is after the Israelites had been freed from their captivity in Egypt, after they have seen all 10 of the plagues, after they have crossed over the Red Sea, we see them building a golden calf. In Exodus chapter 32, I'm going to read the first 5 verses of Exodus chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought up you out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So we see here there's a lack of strength, right? We see the Israelites, they're scared because Moses is up on the mountain. He's receiving the 10 Commandments from the Lord. He's up on Mount Sinai. And apparently he's been a while. It's obvious that, they're scared because he's been so long that they think maybe something happened to him. Maybe he died or something. And it's crazy to me, like I said before, these Israelites are the same ones that have seen all of the miraculous things that God can do. They've seen the 10 plagues in action. They've seen, them crossing through on dry land through the Red Sea, and then the waters coming crashing down on the Egyptians. But they were still not strong and not courageous in the Lord. And then we see in Exodus chapter 32, really what I want to focus on with Moses is Moses being bold to make intercession for the people. God was very upset with the people because of their actions here. And Moses is willing to intercede for them. He says in verse 32 of chapter 32, "But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." So Moses is willing to sacrifice himself and his soul and say, "Lord, take me instead. Do not destroy these people." And of course, the Lord decides not to destroy the people because of this action. So we see this strength and courage. The last example I want to see of Moses is a contrast between the first time that he struck the rock and the second time that he struck the rock. In Exodus chapter 17, we see Moses, Exodus chapter 17 and verse 6, it says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So we see here a direct command by the Lord to Moses saying, strike the rock and provide water for the people of Israel. And he does that, and he's obedient to the Lord, and the Lord is pleased by this. And so, this is Moses exemplifying his strength and courage in the Lord. Then we see in Numbers chapter 20, and verse 10 through 13. "Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, 'Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock?' And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with his staff twice. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, 'Because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given to them.'" So, here Moses does the exact same thing that he had done before. He strikes the rock again. Well, what's the problem with this one? He was instructed to speak to the rock. And here you can kind of see, maybe sometimes we misconstrue what strength and courage is in the Lord, and we say, if we do what I think to be correct, if I do what I believe to be right, then, the Lord will understand that, and, thy strength and courage is going to be placed in the right thing. Well, no, we see that Moses, he did the exact same thing that he had been commanded to do previously, and because the Lord had not asked him to do that, and he did it with the incorrect attitude, he was not considered to be strong. He was considered to be faithless, and that kept him out of the promised land. So we looked at Moses. Let's talk about Peter, example of Peter in the New Testament. First instance I want to look at is when Jesus walked on the water, and we'll look at Peter's courage there. If you will turn to Matthew chapter 14. in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 28, we see Jesus has just appeared to the disciples on the boat, and they're afraid. They think it's a ghost. They don't understand who he is, and he said, "Is I? Don't be afraid." And then Peter says this. He says in verse 28, "And Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" So I think you could take this point with this topic of the sermon as two different ways. You can see that when Peter started walking on the water, he ended up failing, right? He lost his strength and courage, and he wasn't looking to the Lord. He was focused on all the things around him. But what I want to focus on is Peter's decision to originally step out of the boat. And I think that, as Christians, this can be the hardest part, is just deciding to do something initially. As people, I guess it's a hard thing for me. If I think about the different projects, all the different projects that I want to do, or maybe it's a project at school or something to that effect. The hardest part is getting to the point where I'm going to go ahead and start, because it's so overwhelming. I don't know what the implications of it are. I don't know if it's going to be hard. I don't know if it's going to make me demand more of me than I want it to demand. So I'm just not going to start. Well, of this boat, Peter was the only one who was willing to step out and come to the Father, or come to Jesus. And so, in our spiritual lives, we need to be willing to take that step. We need to be willing to go and extend a hand to other people, to talk about scriptural things, to be strong in that way, because that's the example that we've been given. And another point about this is that Peter was, even though he failed, he was looking to the right person to help him whenever he fell. He was looking to Jesus, who actually could do something about it. He wasn't trying to, swim of his own accord. He wasn't trying to do things by himself. Instead, he looked at Jesus and he asked him to help him. In Matthew chapter 16, we see Peter and his answer. And this answer here is to Jesus' question. We'll just go ahead and read the passage in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 13. It says, "Now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, 'Who do people say the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' And he said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter replied, 'You are the Christ, the Son of the living God.' And Jesus answered him, 'Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.'" So we see here Peter and his courage. We see that he was willing. Jesus asked him, all of his disciples, he said, "Who do people say that I am?" And they responded with all different kinds of things. And when he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" we see that Peter was the first to speak up as normal. He was willing to speak up and say, "You are the Christ. You are the Son of God." And make this really bold proclamation. And, we should be like that. And something that's interesting is that, they were among people of the same faith, right? I mean, it was very obvious that, Peter was willing to proclaim this. I don't know if he would have been willing to proclaim it outside of this group, but he was definitely willing to proclaim this amongst those of like faith. I say that because of this next example. The next thing that I want to talk about is something that's more of a contrast. We see Peter in two different situations. First of all, in Matthew chapter 26, we see Peter and Jesus and several other of the apostles when Jesus is to be betrayed by Judas. In chapter 26 and verse 51, it says, "And behold, one of those who were with Jesus," that's Peter, and we see that from John's Gospel, stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. So we see here, Peter is strong, just like when he gave his answer to the Lord. He says, you are the Lord, or you are Jesus Christ, Son of the living God. He's just as bold here. He's willing to say, willing to fight for the Lord physically. And we see that, Jesus told him, Peter, this isn't the time. This is not, my fight is not on this earth. It is a spiritual fight. But we see this boldness by Peter to stand up for the Lord. And especially when he's in the presence of the Lord. And then, just a few verses later in verse 18, or in 18 verses later in verse 69, we see a completely different response by Peter. When Jesus is being tried and Peter is standing watching that, in verse 69 it says, "Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, 'You also were with Jesus the Galilean.' But he denied it before them all, saying, 'I do not know what you mean.' And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, 'This man was with Jesus of Nazareth.' And again he denied it with an oath, 'I do not know the man.' And after a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, 'Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you.' Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know the man.' And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly." So we see the same man in the same series of events go from being boldly beside Jesus. He was willing to even cut off and defend him, in a physical sense. We see him now afraid to even mention that he is associated with Jesus, that he was even in any way associated with Jesus. They even went as far as to say, you even sound like him, and he still denied it. And I think that this is very applicable to me, because a lot of times here, like where we are right now, where I am right now, speaking to all of you about this, it's very easy. It's something that doesn't take a lot of effort on my part to really be bold, to say things that maybe other places would be controversial, but here, they're accepted, and I may even get a pat on the back or something for what I'm saying. But whenever we go out into the world, each and every one of us go out into the world, we have to be just as bold. And we see that, Peter here wasn't. He wasn't willing. He wasn't like that. He was very scared. He was scared that, I'm sure he was scared that the same thing that was happening to Jesus would happen to him if he was associated with him. But, we can't let that fear control us, and we can't let that fear get in the way of us being able to spread the gospel and to be strong in the Lord. The good thing is that we do see Peter in a different light after this point. And this wasn't the end of him. On the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, we see, and won't really read this one, but we see, Peter is the main speaker at the day of Pentecost that we read about, at least. And he was very bold in saying that, you crucified Christ, and he was crucified, and you crucified him, and, his blood is on your hands. And, he's willing to proclaim that in front of people that, they just crucified Christ. What's stopping them from doing that to him at this point? And so he has redeemed himself, I guess, in that he's bold, again, on the behalf of Jesus. We even see it in the face of death for Peter. In 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 12, we see... Chapter 1 and verse 12, it says, "Therefore I intend always to remind you of these qualities, that you know them and are established in the truth that you have." So, really what I want us to get from this is that, Peter was focused, even when he was faced with death, that he was focused on the word and the spreading of the word. And so that's what we should be focused on as well. So we looked at Moses, and we've looked at Peter and the different ways that they have been able to be bold, the different instances when they have been able to stand up for the Lord and what they believe in, and what He's asked them to, or how He has asked them to obey. But now we're going to look at a perfect example, and the standard by which we should mold our lives. First of all, we're going to look at Jesus. We're going to look at Jesus, but first of all, we're going to look at Jesus when he was younger. And I think that this is an important thing for all of the younger people in the audience to kind of focus on, is that, when I was younger, I feel like there was a lot of times when I felt like whatever was being taught wasn't applied to me. And this, let me just tell you right now, this is applied to you. This is very clearly related to you and to your spiritual well-being. In Luke chapter 2 and verse 49, we see Jesus after he has been lost and his parents find him and been worried sick about him. And his reply to them, when they ask him where he's been, he said, and he said to them, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" So even as a young person, a young kid, Jesus was about his Father's business. He was willing, and he wanted to learn. He wanted to teach others. And so we should be that way too, even at young ages. We see in John chapter 2, Jesus driving out the merchants from the temple. John chapter 2 and verse 15. And making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned the tables. And he told those who sold pigeons, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of trade." I think that this example is important when we're talking about being strong and courageous in the Lord. Because a lot of times we want to paint Jesus as just compassionate and just like a lovey-dovey kind of idea in our minds. The fact that Jesus never was upset at anyone, was never mad. But we see a different kind of boldness, a different kind of being strong in the Lord here. We see Jesus, who's very passionate. He has a lot of zeal for the fact that people are desecrating the temple that his Lord, or that God has, or God's temple. And I think that a lot of times in my life, I don't allow things to affect me this much. And that's why I really wanted to bring this up, is that I think that there's a part of me that says, well, this person is like this, and they'll always be like this, and it's okay. That's just how they are. And, it's very obvious that Jesus didn't feel this way. He was willing to take the time to make a whip of cords and to drive out these merchants because, they weren't where they were supposed to be. They were not glorifying the Lord in the temple, and he wanted them out of there. And I think that, in our own lives, not that we're supposed to I'm not telling you to go make a whip of cords and to go whip up on anybody who's sinning. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that, in our approaches, sometimes what is called for is to be bold and to be more harsh, I guess, in a way. It's not always the best to be kind of sidestepping the problem. It's sometimes you have to deal with the problem head on, and that's what we see here with Jesus. In the garden, in Matthew chapter 26, verse 39, it says, "He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will.'" So Jesus knows what's coming, right? He knows that when that he's going to be crucified, and he knows that he has to be. But he asks the Lord. He says, if this could pass from me, but if you, at all costs, your will be done, not my will. And that's something that is kind of hard for me to understand, just the fact that, Jesus has all this power, but he's willing to sacrifice his desire for the will of the Father. And that leads into our last point. On the cross, we see Jesus, I think, be the most strong, or have the most courage that we see in the Bible. And in Matthew chapter 26 is where I want to look. This is actually not when Jesus is on the cross. This passage is not from that. It's from after what we talked about previously. We talked about Peter cutting off the ear of Malchus. Well, this happens right after that. It's when Jesus is trying to explain to Peter, my kingdom is not in this world. This is a spiritual battle. And, he says here, or do you not think I cannot now pray to my Father and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? And this struck me because it's crazy to think that Jesus, with the kind of power that he had, with the ability he had to bring all of these legions of angels, he still suffered on the cross. And I want to give you a kind of an example, like a physical example. I've been working out with a guy. We get up really, really early, go to 24E. And we've been doing a program, and every day it has ab workouts that you have to do. And he makes me do them every single day, and I hate it. And one of those workouts is a plank. And I'm sure a lot of you know what a plank is, but I'll just explain it. Basically, you're sitting in a push-up position with your elbows on the ground, and you have to just hold there. You just have to stay there for however long you want to do. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. That'd be horrible. And you continue to hold that until you're done with the time limit. And it's one of those things that just requires a lot of self-control, because very easily you can just put your knee down and just get out of that situation where you feel uncomfortable. Because as soon as you put your knee down, you relinquish the pain that you're feeling. And when I think about Jesus and him being on the cross, having the ability to relinquish his pain, it would have been really easy for him to put his knee down. If you think about it in that context, it would have been really easy for him to say, I don't have to deal with this. I'm just going to call 12 legions of angels and just be done with all of this. But instead, he was willing to endure that, and that is awesome to me. That Jesus was willing to do that for each and every one of us. So, thinking about the courage that we have, I want to look at some applications in our daily lives. First of all, being strong in the Lord requires us to talk about spiritual things on a daily basis. Talking about it with people that are Christians, talking about these type of topics with people who aren't Christians to increase your faith. And I think that this is really one of the biggest reasons why I decided to give this talk, was because I think that I don't do this enough, and I want to work on this. Now, I think that it's fine for us to look to maybe Andrew and Jason for organization. I think that that's good. Like I look to them for the UAB study or something like that to kind of spark that. But it has to be an individual thing, right? It has to be an individual thing for every single one of us, because they can't do it all on their own. There's no way for them to be able to reach as many people as it would be if we all personally were to have conversations daily, were to talk to people daily, and to just be more about the Word each and every day. Second thing is, it kind of goes hand in hand with the first thing. Don't be shy. Don't shy away from opportunities to spread the gospel. If you look at John chapter 4 and verses 1 through 26, we're not going to read that. But we see here Jesus talking to the woman at the well. And, he asks her for a drink, and then they get to talking about spiritual things. And, Jesus sends the disciples to go get food. So it's very obvious here that Jesus is hungry and he's thirsty. But he's willing to put the well-being of this woman and of the other people in Samaria, in this area, before his physical desires. And how many times have you thought, I don't want to get caught up in this. I got somewhere to be. Maybe you're at lunch or something. I got a lot to do. I'm really tired. I got to go home. And I just don't want to get caught in this conversation. I just don't want to be in this position where I have to sit here and I have to talk to this other person. And maybe it's about scriptural things. But we see here, Jesus was willing to be strong in that time and take the time to speak to this woman and to spread the gospel to her. Next thing I want us to do in our daily lives is to stand up for the Lord regardless of the consequences. Many of you were probably at Brother Don Ellis's funeral, and Mr. Jeff gave an example or a story of Brother Don that I thought was really influential to me, and I just wanted to reiterate it tonight because I think it goes along with this. Brother Don was apparently a really good athlete in high school, and he was. It was decided that he was to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for his county, and there are only a couple things that were stipulations for this. First thing was, you had to be chosen. The second thing was that, you had to be present for the award ceremony. Well, it happened to be that the award ceremony fell on a Wednesday night. And because of Brother Don's convictions and him wanting to be with all of us, he decided that he wasn't going to attend that ceremony, even though it meant a lot to him. And that is a very it hits close to home for me, because I can think of a lot of times where maybe I have missed because maybe you have a runny nose, or you just don't feel like you're 100% for that day and you just want to go home and sleep. But he had something that was, that's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to be inducted into the Hall of Fame for your county. And it did turn out that he ended up, through the back door, kind of being able to be inducted into that Hall of Fame for his county. But that wasn't why he did what he did. It was because he was willing to stand up for the Lord and for the things that he believed were right. Last thing that I think we should do in our daily lives, or to be strong, courageous in the Lord, is be strong so that those around you have the best chance of eternal life. And I say this thinking about the people that I come in contact on a daily basis that may not have this opportunity to come together, or may not choose to have this opportunity to come together with other Christians and to think about spiritual things. Maybe you're the only thing that they see on a daily basis, or a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. Maybe you're the only, part of the gospel that they'll see. I know we hear that a lot. But, if you're not spreading it with them, then who will be? It may turn out that they end up having someone else talk to them and being converted that way. But there's no way for you to know that. So if you're strong and you're willing to talk to them and you're willing to stand up for what you believe in, then they'll have the best chance of eternal life. And so tonight we're going to be singing Be Strong and Courageous. And, if you've never taken the first step like Peter, if you've never taken the first step and being, willing to step out of the boat and to be strong initially, then, this doesn't really help you very much. It's more of an ongoing thing. You have to be willing, and I hope that you will choose to be strong tonight and to come to the front and to have your sins washed away in baptism. If you maybe are a Christian and you have fallen away, we hope that you will come and make your life right tonight as we stand and as we sing.
Be strong.